The Declaration. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy, without professing attachment to any Theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves, by study and otherwise, to be better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all.
Thank you. Next, we'll touch briefly on the three fundamental propositions. These are the basis of the entire philosophy, and they're written down by HPB in the Proem of the Secret Doctrine. And the first is that there's a absolute metaphysical substance principle that is eternal, omnipresent, boundless, and immutable, and upon which all speculation is impossible because it transcends human thought. And to give it a name is to limit it. So therefore, it has been symbolized as beingness instead of being. And it is essentially the root of everything that ever was, is, or shall be. The second fundamental proposition relates to law and cycles. And it states that everything proceeds in cycles. The universe itself is breathed out and breathed in periodically. And there has been numberless universes manifesting and disappearing. And we can see the law of periodicity in our own lives, in sleeping and waking, day and night, life and death. The third fundamental states that all souls take an obligatory pilgrimage through the cycle of incarnation or necessity, and it cannot get a conscious, individualized status until it is essentially passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world and acquires individuality, first by natural impulse and then through self-induced and self-devised efforts. And thus it ascends through all the degrees of intelligence from the very lowest to the highest. And it admits of no special gifts or privileges in man, save those won by his own ego through merit and a long series of reincarnations. So those are the three fundamental propositions. And we'll just open it up and see if anybody has any questions or thoughts. Okay. I'm going to do a reading from the Voice of the Silence, and then there will be several readings that commemorate Robert Crosbie, who started United Lodge of Theosophists, and then there'll be a short biographical talk on his life and the future of the Theosophical movement, and then we'll conclude and can there'll be a final reading, and then we can open up for social time to reconnect. So the reading comes from the voice of the silence in the two paths. Thou canst create this day thy chances for thy morrow. In the great journey, causes sown each hour bear each its harvest of effects, for rigid justice rules the world. With mighty sweep of never-erring action, it brings to mortals lives of weal or woe, the karmic progeny of all our former thoughts and deeds. Take then as much as merit hath in store for thee, O thou of patient heart. Be of good cheer and rest content with fate. Such is thy karma, the karma of the cycle of thy births, the destiny of those who in their pain and sorrow are born along with thee. Rejoice and weep from life to life, chained to thy previous actions. Act thou for them today, and they will act for thee tomorrow. And now we'll have the first reading from, I believe it's William Q. Judge.
Yes. The first reading is from the writings of William Q. Judge. Theosophy, the wisdom religion, has existed from immemorial time. It offers us a theory of nature and of life, which is founded upon knowledge acquired by the sages of the past, more especially those of the East. And its higher students claim that this knowledge is not imagined or inferred, but that it is a knowledge of facts seen and known by those who are willing to comply with the conditions required for seeing and knowing. Theosophy implies wisdom respecting the absolute. And since the absolute is without beginning and eternal, this wisdom must have existed always. Hence, theosophy is sometimes called the wisdom religion, because from immemorial time it has had knowledge of all the laws governing the spiritual, the moral, and the material. The theory of nature and of life, which it offers, is not one that was at first speculatively laid down and then proved by adjusting facts or conclusions to fit it, but is an explanation of existence, cosmic and individual, derived from knowledge reached by those who have acquired the power to see behind a curtain that hides the operations of nature from the ordinary mind. Such beings are called sages, using the term in its highest sense. Of late, they have been called Mahatmas and Adepts. In ancient times, they were known as the Rishis and Maharishis. It is not claimed that these exalted beings or sages have existed only in the East. They are known to have lived in all parts of the globe in obedience to the cyclic laws referred to below. But as far as concerns the present development of the human race on this planet, they are now to be found in the East. As a rationale of spiritual development, Theosophy asserts that the process takes place entirely within the individual himself, the motive, the effort, and the result producing from his own inner nature along the lines of evolution. And that, however personal and interior, this process is not unaided, being possible, in fact, only through close communion with the supreme source of all strength. As to the degree of advancement in incarnations, it holds that even a mere intellectual acquaintance with theosophic truth has great value in fitting the individual for a step upward in his next earth life, as it gives an impulse in that direction. That still more is gained by a career full of duty, piety, and beneficence. That a still greater advance is attained by the attentive and devoted use of the means of spiritual culture. That every race and individual of it reaches in evolution a period known as a moment of choice, when they decide for themselves their future destiny by a deliberate and conscious choice between eternal life and death. And this right of choice is the peculiar privilege of the free soul. It cannot be exercised until the man has realized that soul within him and until the soul has attained some measure of self-consciousness in the body. The moment of choice is not a fixed period of time. It is made up of all moments. It cannot come unless all the previous lives have led up to it. For the race as a whole, it has not yet come. Any individual can hasten the advent of this period for himself under the previously stated law of the ripening of karma. Should he then fail to choose right, he is not only wholly condemned, but the economy of nature provides that he shall again and again have the opportunity of choice when the moment arrives for the whole race.
Go ahead, Carolina, reading number 2.
Reading number 2 from the writings of Robert Crosbie. It is to the teachings that attention has to be called, not to ourselves, who are only handing them on as best we can. If one sees that in many ways he is not able to do all that needs to be done, or that he would like to accomplish, it is evidence that he is in the way of improving. Our ideals are never reached, they continually precede us. As a man thinks, so he becomes. Time is an element in this, and it is shortened by patient doing of what we can. To be in the least cast down by our apparent imperfections is a form of impatience, a disregard of law. Whatever comes is right until something better appears. Observed defects will fade out under observation, so we can cheerfully bear with our own defects as well as those of others, while we go right on working. Could right philosophy be implanted, even the single idea of the divine nature of man, a greater impetus would be given to right living. Then a philosophy in accord with this nature would be sought by those so quickened. Without the right philosophy, strength and special faculties are useless. If all study so as to be the better able to help and teach others, there must result a general gain and help. Theosophists must point out error by comparison with theosophy. Methods must vary with time, place, and conditions. Few minds, especially those attracted by the lure of the occult, are able to make applications in any wide sense. Distinctions have to be pointed out to them. We have to learn that the way to present truth is by examining various beliefs in its light. The right to obtain consideration of the ideas we have to present implies a full sense of freedom on the part of the one who listens, as well as on the part of the speaker. In these days of proselytizing and propaganda for all sorts of isms, there is the more need for tolerance if we are to find those chinks in the mind of others through which questions may possibly be aroused. We can set the example of examining anything on its merits, and then presenting in contrast the theosophical view, which accords with nature as a whole. I think that the word theosophy has power. If it had not, there would not be so many misusing the name. In spite of all this, theosophy itself is untouched. Our work is to keep it pure as it was delivered to us, for the sake of those who can be helped. Theosophy, pure and simple, is the standard by which efforts may be applied and errors combated. So it must always be kept in evidence as the source of all right effort. Thanks.
Reading number 3 is from the writings of H.P. Blavatsky. Theosophy is as old as the world, in its teachings and ethics, if not in name. Underlying every ancient popular religion was the same ancient wisdom doctrine, one and identical, professed and practiced by the initiates of every country, who alone were aware of its existence and importance. To ascertain its origin and the precise age in which it was matured is now beyond human possibility. A philosophy so profound, a moral code so ennobling, and practical results so conclusive and so uniformly demonstrable is not the growth of a generation or even a single epoch. Fact must have been piled upon fact, deduction upon deduction, science have begotten science, and myriads of the brightest human intellects have reflected upon the laws of nature before this ancient doctrine had taken concrete shape. The wisdom religion is the inheritance of all the nations the world over. The aims of theosophy are several, but the most important of all are those which are likely to lead to the relief of human suffering under any or every form, moral as well as physical. And we believe the former to be far more important than the latter. Theosophy has to inculcate ethics. It has to purify the soul if it would relieve the physical body, whose ailments, save cases of accidents, are all hereditary. It is not by studying occultism for selfish ends that one can ever reach the true goal, that of helping suffering mankind. As mankind is essentially of one and the same essence, and this essence is one, infinite, uncreate, and eternal, whether we call it God or nature, nothing, therefore, can affect one nation or one man without affecting all other nations and all other men. This is as certain and as obvious as that a stone thrown into a pond will, sooner or later, set in motion every single drop of water therein. It is an occult law that no man can rise superior to his individual failings without lifting, be it ever so little, the whole body of which he is an integral part. In the same way, no one can sin nor suffer the effects of sin alone. All pain and suffering are results of want of harmony, and the one terrible and only cause of the disturbance of harmony is selfishness in some form or another. Hence, karma gives back to every man the actual consequences of his own actions, without any regard to their moral character. But since he receives his due for all, it is obvious that he will be made to atone for all sufferings which he has caused, just as he will reap in joy and gladness the fruits of all the happiness and harmony he had helped to produce. Make men feel and recognize in their innermost hearts what is their real, true duty to all men, and every old abuse of power, every iniquitous law in the national policy based on human, social, or political selfishness will disappear of itself.
Thank you. Robert Crosbie, among the figures most associated with the modern Theosophical movement, Robert Crosbie occupies a unique position. Unlike H.P. Blavatsky, whose writings transformed the spiritual landscape of the 19th century, or William Q. Judge, whose leadership helped preserve the movement during its formative years, Crosbie left behind no monumental literary works, and he sought no public prominence. But his influence continues to be felt for more than a century after his death. He began the United Lodge of Theosophists, an organization founded upon the principles essential to the preservation of the original Theosophical impulse. The life of Robert Crosbie presents an interesting paradox. Although he played a significant role in the history of Theosophy, not a lot is known about his personal life. This scarcity of biographical detail is due in part to Crosbie's own character. He didn't cultivate a public image or write an autobiography or encourage personal devotion. Those who knew him often remarked that he seemed almost deliberately to avoid drawing attention to himself. His concern was always directed toward the work rather than the worker, towards principles rather than personalities. He was born in Montreal, Canada on January 10th, 1849, of Scottish ancestry, and the details of his youth and early adulthood remain largely unknown. But those who later associated with him recognized qualities that would define his life: sincerity, practical judgment, perseverance, and an earnest search for truth. Before he became deeply involved in theosophy, he worked in business and lived the life of an ordinary person. Nothing in his early circumstances suggested he would one day become one of the most influential preservers of the theosophical impulse. The latter part of the 19th century, just to set the stage, was a period of profound intellectual and spiritual ferment. Scientific discoveries were challenging traditional religious beliefs, while many thoughtful individuals were seeking a broader understanding of humanity's place in the universe. And into this atmosphere came the teachings of H.P. Blavatsky, the ones she communicated. Through her books, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, she presented what she described as fragments of the ancient wisdom religion, a body of knowledge underlying the world's religious and philosophical traditions. Like many sincere seekers of truth at this time, Crosbie was deeply attracted to theosophical teachings. They offered a vision of life that united science, philosophy, and religion while affirming universal principles such as karma, reincarnation, and the unity of all life. More importantly, they emphasized the ethical implications of these ideas. Theosophy wasn't merely a system of metaphysics, it's a call to live differently, to live with more awareness of how each one of us affects others. A huge influence on Crosbie was his association with William Q. Judge. Judge was a co-founder of the Theosophical Society and one of H.P. Blavatsky's closest co-workers. He emphasized the practical application of theosophy in daily life, and he taught that the purpose of spiritual knowledge wasn't to satisfy the intellect, but to be a vehicle for self-transformation and service to others. Crosbie regarded Judge as a faithful representative of this original theosophical impulse. And under Judge's influence, he deepened his understanding of the teachings and strengthened his commitment to the ideals of universal brotherhood and selfless service. And the relationship between the two men appears to have been based on their shared philosophical convictions, but also on a common understanding of the responsibility that accompanies spiritual knowledge. These responsibilities include living the teachings, not just studying them, having a greater consideration for others than oneself, self-discipline, purifying one's motives, compassion for others, and a recognition and awareness of karma, meaning that awareness that one's thoughts, motives, and actions have consequences not only for oneself, but they affect all others. Both William Q. Judge and Robert Crosbie acknowledged and lived that ideal, that wisdom and responsibility advance together. It's not really possible to truly have one or go far with just one of those, that wisdom and responsibility go together. When William Q. Judge passed away in 1896, it marked a turning point in the history of the Theosophical movement, and of course for Robert Crosbie, his own life. The years that followed were characterized by controversy, organizational division, and disputes concerning leadership. And like many devoted students, Crosbie remained active in the work, and he sought to support what he believed to be the continuation of Mr. Judge's efforts. For a time, Crosbie was active within the Theosophical Society in America, And that was the organization that sort of came out after Judge passed away in America, because they separated from the Theosophical Society in Adyar, India. And Mr. Crosbie worked diligently and loyally. He held positions of responsibility, and he contributed his energies to the cause of Theosophy. But over time, he became increasingly concerned by developments that seemed to shift attention away from the fundamental principles towards personalities. And the details of these concerns are less important than the lesson Crosbie drew from them. He came to believe that even sincere organizations can become distracted from their own original purpose. And when authority becomes concentrated in individuals, students gradually become, they can become dependent upon leaders rather than their own understanding. And loyalty to persons can unintentionally replace loyalty to principles. Mr. Crosbie saw this as a danger not only for organizations, but for the spiritual development of the individuals involved. And this conviction would become one of the central lessons he carried forward into his life and later work. What's noteworthy about it is the manner in which he responded to these changes. He didn't become a public critic. He didn't engage in prolonged controversy or making a big deal about it, essentially. Instead, he quietly withdrew, and he spent years reflecting on the future of theosophical work. And this period of relative obscurity was one of the most important phases of his life, because it helped him to sort of incubate or formulate the vision that would eventually find expression in the United Lodge of Theosophists. Those who knew Crosbie personally during these years described a man of unusual patience and humility. He listened carefully, he spoke thoughtfully, and he encouraged others to think for themselves. He didn't encourage people to follow him or become reliant on him. Rather than presenting himself as an authority, he directed students back to the teachings. And throughout his life, he gave practical expression to Judge's teaching that spiritual progress has to be the result of self-induced and self-devised efforts. Many reminiscences have been described on the impression they got from Robert Crosbie. People came expecting instruction from a leader, but came away feeling encouraged to rely on their own capacities. And this really distinguished Crosbie from a lot of spiritual teachers of that day and of any day, really, because his influence wasn't based on charisma or personality or claims of some special status. It arose from the consistency between what he said and what he did, the teachings and how he lived his life. In about 1909, after years of reflection and preparation, Crosbie and a small group of associates established the United Lodge of Theosophists in Los Angeles. And the founding document, known simply as the Declaration of United Lodge of Theosophists, remains one of the most remarkable statements made in theosophical history. Few organizations have ever been founded on such an impersonal basis, defining themselves not through leaders and offices and officers or beliefs, but through just a shared dedication to principles and service. The Declaration contains no provisions for presidents or authorities or hierarchical control in any form. It creates no system of leadership through one person exercising authority over another. It's really speaks of associates united by devotion to the service of humanity and to the study and dissemination of theosophy. And this position reflected a profound philosophical conviction. Crosbie believed that the principles of universal brotherhood should be expressed both in theory and in the life of the organization, ULT. If all human beings share a common spiritual nature, then cooperation should arise from mutual respect and voluntary effort rather than from any external authority. The Declaration also affirms loyalty to the cause of theosophy and to the teachings of H.P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge. But this loyalty was never intended as devotion to personalities. Crosbie's purpose was to preserve what he regarded as authentic expositions of the ancient wisdom religion. Students were, and still are, encouraged to study the original sources directly and to arrive at an understanding through their own efforts. This emphasis reveals an important aspect of Crosbie's understanding of the Theosophical movement. He really believed that the movement itself was larger than any one organization. While HPB had repeatedly distinguished between the Theosophical Society and the broader Theosophical movement, Crosbie saw organization as like a temporary vehicle, and that the movement is the continuing effort to preserve and transmit spiritual truths for the benefit of humanity. So Crosbie sort of embraced this distinction completely. He saw himself not as the founder of a new organization, but as a servant of ongoing work. And his task, as he understood it, was to help preserve conditions under which the teachings could continue to be studied and applied. And this helps explain why ULT has always placed such emphasis on the writings of HPB and Judge. Crosbie didn't claim to bring any new elements, no new revelation. He sought to just maintain access to what had already been given. Reprinting some of the works as they were originally given out, because in the Theosophical Society, some took efforts to like edit some of the writings and made a lot of changes, and he sought to just, maintain access to the original impulse. So he acted more like a steward entrusted with preserving an inheritance for future generations. Mr. Crosbie did write a lot of letters to associates and inquirers, and the collection of his letters was published under the title The Friendly Philosopher. And this kind of says it a lot about the type of person Mr. Crosbie was. These letters provide further insight into his character, his outlook, and how he tried to help others. And what they reveal is a practical and compassionate person concerned with the everyday problems faced by others. Again and again, he directed attention toward ethical conduct, personal responsibility, and self-transformation. For Crosbie, knowledge divorced from action was of limited value. The true test of understanding lay in conduct. Karma, reincarnation, and universal brotherhood are not abstract doctrines, but realities that should shape one's relationships, decisions, and aspirations. And this kind of practical emphasis remains one of Mr. Crosbie's most enduring contributions. In an age increasingly fascinated by psychic phenomena and occult speculation, Crosbie continually redirected attention towards character and service. When he passed away on June 25th, 1919, only about 10 years after founding ULT, he left behind no designated successor, no claim to authority, and that was just, entirely consistent with how he had lived his life. He trusted that if the teachings were preserved and studied with sincerity, the work would continue through the efforts of dedicated individuals. And from where we are now, more than a century later, his confidence appears to have been justified. The future of ULT and of the broader Theosophical movement remains closely connected to the principles that guided Crosbie's life. The challenges facing humanity today differ in many respects from those of the 19th century, but the essential questions remain remarkably the same. What is the nature of consciousness? What responsibilities do individuals owe to one another? How can humanity overcome division and recognize its fundamental unity? Theosophy addresses these questions through the ideal of universal brotherhood. According to the teachings of HPB and Judge, brotherhood is not an ethical ideal, but a fact in nature. And humanity is linked together through a common spiritual essence. What we experience is the illusion of separateness. But if we are fundamentally united, then every thought and every action affects the larger whole. And understanding this principle may be even more relevant today than in Crosbie's day, because advances in communication, transportation, technology have revealed the profound interconnectedness of human life and how much we seek to connect with others. And the problems of today, such as environmental degradation, social conflict, and economic inequality, demonstrate that actions taken in one part of the world often affect people far beyond the point of origin. So Theosophy offers a framework for understanding this interconnectedness while still emphasizing personal responsibility. And it teaches or proposes that lasting solutions must arise from each person through inner transformation. The future of the Theosophical movement, therefore, should be measured by more than organizational growth or the number of associates. From Crosbie's perspective, the real question is whether individuals are striving on a daily basis to embody the principles they study. Are students becoming more compassionate, more selfless, more aware of their responsibility to humanity? Are they applying the teachings in daily life? Theosophical philosophy also presents a cyclical view of history. Ideas, civilizations, and movements rise and fall according to natural rhythms. And from this perspective, periods of apparent decline need not be discouraging. What matters is whether the essential teachings remain available and whether there are individuals willing to preserve and transmit them. And this is what Crosbie understood so well. Rather than attempting to build a large institution, he focused on preserving a living tradition. And one might compare his work to tending a flame. The purpose of the flame is not to dazzle, but to endure and provide light for those who seek it. As we consider the life of Robert Crosbie today, we encounter more than just a historical figure. He was an example of devotion to principles, fidelity to truth, and a commitment to service. And his life demonstrated that influence does not depend on being an authority, and that leadership can be exercised through example. And perhaps the most fitting assessment of his legacy is that he remained faithful to the ideal that inspired the modern Theosophical movement from the beginning, the realization of universal brotherhood. Through his efforts, he sought to create conditions under which students could study, reflect, and work together in spirit. So the future of the movement ultimately rests where Crosbie believed it always belonged, not in the organization, not in personalities, but in the hearts and minds of individuals willing to live the teachings. As long as there are those who strive to understand truth, to practice brotherhood, and to dedicate themselves to the welfare of humanity, the work to which Robert Crosbie devoted his life will continue. And next, there'll be a final reading. Lenning, are you going to do reading number 4?
Yes.
Great.
Give me a second.
Great.
Okay. Reading number 4. A knowledge of theosophy enables us to understand that there never was any creation in the sense of making something out of nothing, but that everything, every being of every kind has evolved and is still evolving. The beings below us are evolving to our state where the beings now evolved so far beyond us, sometime in the distant past, went through a similar stage. All beings are what they are through evolution from within outwards, that evolution proceeding under law. Law is operative everywhere and upon every being, because the law is not something separate from him. It is not separate from the inner spiritual man. Law is the law of man's own action. So we act along those lines that affect others for good or for evil. We necessarily receive the return from those good or evil effects, which we cause others to experience. Each individual is the operator of the law. According to his actions, he gets the reactions. According to his own sowing, does he reap. In place then of the idea of a revengeful God, we have the ideas of absolute justice and individual responsibility. If from the point of view of law, we ask ourselves what pre-existing causes brought us into these relations, we can see that what now is must have been brought about by ourselves, and what now is similar to what was. And once the idea is presented to our minds that this is not the first time, by many times, we have been in a body, that reincarnation is a process by which human beings reach greater and greater heights, that there is no other way or means to learn all the lessons to be gained in physical life among our fellow men, except through repeated incarnations. We come then to another phase of our being, for we see there is in us something that is continuous in its operation, something which was never born and never dies. If it continues from one life to another, through many lives, and for many lives, there must be a permanency in us, which no change of condition or body or circumstance can alter for a single instant. As we thus think in terms of ages rather than in the days of one short life, we begin to get a glimpse of that reality which lies within us. We open the doors so that those internal, real, more permanent perceptions can find operation in our daily waking thought. For every single human being has sprung from the one great source, is animated by that, is in fact, that at the very root of his being, in that is his power of perception and of action, which is spiritual and permanent. The power of perception and of action exists in everyone. The direction of that perception and action rests in everyone. Each has the power to take the course which to him seems best, but in taking the course he sows and must also reap, as was the nature of his sowing. Every being in this universe of law is experiencing as he is because of his own thoughts, words, and deeds. Every circumstance, every mishap, every evil that comes to us, as well as every good, is due to thought, word, or deed of ours in the past. In each incarnation, we find friends as well as enemies. So our minds may be set at rest with regard to either God or devil. Each of each one of us represents both the spirit, the highest divine nature, and also the very lowest, the infernal nature. Man is spiritual, in fact, but thinking himself material and separate, and acting in accordance with his thinking, he brings about the battle between the two natures in him. This great philosophy of Theosophy then presents a basis from which the truest kind of morality can be perceived. True morality does not depend upon word phrases or conventions, but upon an universal perception of all things, whereby everything is done for good, every thought and feeling expended for the benefit of others rather than for oneself, a clear perception of one's own spiritual nature, and a motive to benefit mankind in every direction and in every case. Without self-interest are the two essentials for true morality. True morality is, in fact, a universal existence, and the beginning of it is the desire to live to benefit mankind without self-interest or hope of any reward whatever, then to practice and help those who know still less than we do.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So that concludes like the formal presentation part, but we still have a few minutes to renew ties of fellowship, get updated on what's going on with our website.
Hey, Lenny, can you please mute your computer?
I will.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you all for attending and appreciate all your contributions. I think I said at the beginning, but I'll just, since everyone's here, I'll update you again. The website was in Herb had started ultdc.org. And so since he passed away, that account just probably ended at some point. So Jason is going to try, his son is going to try to get the recovery process going to see if he can get into Herb's GoDaddy account and renew it. Meanwhile, it's gone up for auction. And this happens, and Josh has put in a bid to get that website back. And in the meantime, he took the old site, made a mirror of it on ultdc.net, which is operative. So you can look at any of the past programs there, the current program, etc. We still hope to get ultdc.org back because we've had it for 27 years, and it seems more appropriate than .net. But in case we don't get it back, we'll switch to .net, I guess. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Josh, to that summary. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. No, that was a good summary. The auction process only goes for like another week. There had been no bids at the time that I found it in this state. So the bid is currently $1. So there's no, I don't think any, like there's not great expense that's going to be incurred here. The only risk, I think, is that there are organizations that have a somewhat predatory business practice of automatically registering any expired domain, thinking that whoever let it expire may have done so by mistake, and then they sort of hold it for ransom to get it back. It's not something that we have to get, that we have to be too concerned about. If that were to happen, we would simply start using ultdc.net instead of .org. It's a pretty simple change, and as much as I can appreciate the sort of history of having a domain for 27 years uninterrupted, it's just a domain name. It's just a website. It's like moving your physical location from suburban Maryland to Northern Virginia, right? It's just how these things go sometimes. So.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions or thoughts about that?
No, guess I was reflecting on all the problems with domains, with registrations, and every time I get frustrated about it, I say all of this worse of our declaration, because